The year was 1881, and the Ozark Trail was a lonely stretch of dirt and fog. Travelers called it the road that hummed at night, though no one ever agreed on what the sound truly was. Some said it was the wind cutting through the trees. Others swore it was something buried beneath. One late autumn evening, a weary rider named Elias Finch approached a small building lit by oil lanterns. A tavern that had no name carved above its door. The sign only read, "Rest, Warmth, Ale." Elias dismounted his horse and looked around. The ground near the tavern dipped slightly, uneven, as if it had been disturbed once and never properly settled. The air smelled faintly of earth, freshly turned earth. He didn't think much of it then. Inside, laughter mingled with the crackling of the hearth. The barkeep, May Calder, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a gentle smile, greeted him. "Long way from anywhere, stranger," she said. Elias nodded. "Long way from everything, it seems." Something about the place felt comforting. And yet, as the door shut behind him, he couldn't shake the sense that he had just stepped over something meant to stay buried. May ran the tavern mostly alone, with help from a young boy named Thomas, an orphan who swept the floors and stoked the fires. The tavern had once been a family home, she explained. Her husband, Jonas Calder, had built it himself, plank by plank, stone by stone, until one stormy night when he simply vanished. No one knew where Jonas had gone. Some said he ran off west. Others whispered he was taken by the trail. May never confirmed either story. But each evening when she lit the lanterns, she'd pause at the back wall near the cellar door and whisper a quiet prayer. Not to God, but to someone else. Elias noticed it on his second night there. "You pray often," he said. May froze. "Just to keep the trail quiet," she murmured. "It remembers things. And sometimes it talks." He thought she was joking, until that night when the tavern's floorboards began to creak on their own. It was well past midnight when Elias heard it. A faint whisper, like breath pushing through wood. It came from beneath the floorboards near his bed. He sat up, holding his lantern low, his heart pounding. "Help me." The words were so soft he thought it was the wind outside, but the tavern was sealed tight. He pressed his ear to the floor. Again, faint, trembling, desperate, "Help me." Elias stumbled downstairs, half believing he was losing his mind. May stood by the hearth, awake, her face pale. "You heard it," she said. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded slowly. May sighed. "It doesn't speak every night. Only when someone with a guilty soul walks through that door." He frowned. "Then why tonight?" She met his eyes. "That's what I'd like to know." Over the next few days, the two spoke little. Elias helped Thomas chop wood, repaired loose shutters, and stayed longer than he'd planned. But May could tell he carried something heavy inside him. Finally, one evening, Elias confessed. "I wasn't always a traitor," he said, staring into his mug. "During the war, I did things I'm not proud of. Took from families, burned homes, all in the name of survival." May listened in silence. "Maybe that's why the trail called to you," she said softly. "This tavern. It has a way of finding the ones who need to remember." Her words chilled him more than the autumn wind. Because she was right. He hadn't meant to stop there. Something, or someone, had pulled him off the trail. Thomas, the boy, avoided the cellar at all costs. He'd deliver barrels to the edge of the stairs and leave them there, refusing to go any farther. When Elias asked why, the boy whispered, "There's someone down there." May scolded him for talking nonsense, but that night Elias decided to see for himself. The cellar smelled of damp wood and earth. Dust motes hung in the air. At the far end, a single stone in the floor seemed newer than the rest. Elias crouched down, brushing dirt away, and found a small carved symbol etched into it. a circle split by a crooked line, like a sun broken in half. He'd seen that mark before. During the war. It was the mark soldiers left over shallow graves. His blood ran cold. Elias confronted May the next morning. "You built this tavern over a grave." She didn't deny it. She simply leaned against the bar and stared into the fire. "Jonas built it," she said. "He said it was cheaper to use the land the old way station once stood on." I didn't ask questions until after he vanished. Then I started hearing, "Him." "Him?" Elias asked. May nodded slowly. "The man buried beneath us. He never told me his name. But he whispers things about the trail, about travelers who never made it home. And sometimes," she said, her voice trembling, "he whispers about Jonas." Elias felt the room grow colder. "What does he say about him?" May met his eyes, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "He says Jonas was the one who killed him." While May prepared supper, Elias searched the attic. There, hidden behind a loose plank, he found an old leather-bound journal covered in dust. The entries were written in shaky handwriting, signed only with initials, R.C. June 5, 1878. "I came upon the Calder homestead before nightfall. Jonas offered me bread and whiskey. I was grateful. I should have kept riding." June 6th. "Something is wrong here. The woman is kind but quiet. Jonas watches me as though I'm already gone." June 7th. "I hear digging outside at night. If I do not leave tomorrow, I fear I never will." The final page was torn, but Elias found dried mud and a faint print of a hand, as if someone had gripped it tightly before dying. He carried the journal downstairs and laid it on the table. May's face turned white. "R.C.," she whispered. "That was Robert Cole." Jonas's partner Elias swallowed. "Then Robert's the one buried under the tavern." May's eyes filled with tears. "And he's still waiting for justice." That night, fog rolled down the Ozark Trail like smoke from a ghostly fire. Elias couldn't sleep. He went outside with a lantern and stood near the tavern's uneven ground. The place he now knew was a grave. "Robert Cole," he called softly. "If you can hear me, what do you want?" The lantern flickered. The ground shifted slightly beneath his boots. A whisper rose from below, not angry, but sorrowful. "Tell her the truth." Elias turned toward the tavern window, where May stood watching from behind the glass, her face pale and uncertain. He understood then. The ghost didn't want revenge. He wanted peace. But peace could only come through truth, and truth always demanded a price. Determined to uncover what really happened, Elias pried open the wooden panels near the cellar door. Inside, he found a bundle of old letters bound with a piece of fraying twine. They were written by Jonas himself. "May, if you ever find these, know I never meant to harm him. Robert was going to take the deed, the tavern, everything. He threatened you. I only meant to scare him, but the fall, it killed him. I buried him near the hearth because I couldn't bear to lose what we built." The final letter ended with a single line. "If there is a God left to hear me, forgive me. I built this tavern over his grave, not to hide my sin, but to keep it close enough to remind me of it." Elias sat there for a long time, the letters trembling in his hands. Jonas had vanished, but guilt had buried him long before the trail ever did. When dawn came, Elias told May everything. He showed her the letters, the journal, and the mark in the cellar. For a long while she said nothing. Then she went to the hearth, knelt, and began to dig with her bare hands. Thomas cried out, but Elias joined her. Together, they uncovered the remains of a man long forgotten. Just bones and the remnants of a travel coat. May wept quietly as Elias bowed his head. "He doesn't want vengeance," he said softly. "He just wants to be remembered." They carried the bones outside and buried them beneath the oldest oak on the trail. May placed a wooden cross above the mound and whispered, "Rest now, Robert Cole. Your story's been told." As the wind swept through the trees, the tavern behind them seemed to exhale, as if releasing a breath it had held for years. That night, for the first time since 1878, the trail was silent. But Elias knew the story wasn't over, because when he entered his room that evening, a fresh journal lay on the table, one he didn't bring, and on the first page, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Now it's your turn, Elias Finch." Elias stared at the journal lying on his table. The cover was new, no dust, no wear, yet the initials burned into its leather were R.C. He opened it. "To the man who carries guilt like a lantern in the dark, I have seen you. You walk with sins you cannot bury, just as I was buried beneath yours. The difference, Elias Finch, is that you still have time to make it right." His breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakably the same as in Robert Cole's journal, shaky, deliberate. Ink faded at the edges. But Robert Cole had been dead for years. The pages that followed were blank, except for a faint impression as if someone had written and erased words hundreds of times. Elias whispered to the empty room, "What do you want from me?" The lantern flickered once, then steadied, as though someone invisible had exhaled beside him, and from somewhere near the floorboards he heard it again. "Finish the story." That night, Elias dreamed of the war, of burning fields, of faces he'd forgotten, and of the sound of shovels striking earth. He saw himself standing over a man he'd robbed on a battlefield road, a man he'd left for dead. He never learned his name. In his dream, that man looked up and whispered, "You buried me shallow too." Elias woke drenched in sweat, gasping. The tavern was quiet except for the sound of rain. He went downstairs, poured a drink, and stared into the fire. May joined him, her eyes red from weeping. "I heard you talking," she said softly. "To someone who isn't here." Elias nodded. "Maybe he's more here than we are." She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then maybe you should listen." Outside, thunder rolled across the Ozark hills, long, low, and mournful. Days passed. Travelers came and went, unaware of the secret that slept beneath the tavern floor. But one evening an old man arrived, soaked to the bone. His name was Silas Boone, a peddler who'd roamed the Ozark Trail for decades. When he saw the tavern, his face went pale. "This place," he muttered. "Didn't there used to be a grave here?" May froze. "You knew about it?" Silas nodded slowly. "I knew Robert Cole. Rode with him for a while. When he disappeared, I searched. But Jonas Calder told me he never made it this far." He looked around the tavern, eyes narrowing. "Seems Jonas built himself quite a monument over the man's bones." Elias leaned forward. "Then you knew them both. Tell me, was Robert a good man?" Silas smiled sadly. "No man's all good or bad, but he didn't deserve what he got. None of us do." Elias stared at the floorboards, his jaw tight. Maybe it's time someone paid the debt that's still owed. Elias decided to leave at dawn. He couldn't stay in a place where the past whispered through the walls. But that night, as he packed, every lantern in the tavern lit on its own. May and Thomas ran downstairs, frightened. The flames swayed like breath, forming shapes, shadows that twisted and danced across the walls. Then, in the flicker, May saw him, Jonas Calder, standing in the doorway, soaked in the rain, his eyes full of regret. "May," the apparition said softly, "I never meant for this." She trembled. "Jonas?" He nodded slowly. "The grave beneath us was never meant to be hidden. I built over it because I thought I could bury my sin with him. But I was wrong." The trail remembers Elias stepped forward, heart pounding. Then set it right. Tell her everything. Jonas's ghost turned toward Elias, sorrow etched into his fading face. You already have. And with that, the lanterns went out. The next morning, the tavern felt lighter, almost new. Birds sang outside, something May swore she hadn't heard in years. But Elias couldn't shake a strange pull in his chest. The journal still lay on his table, open to a new line that hadn't been there before. The trail has one more grave to tend. He knew what it meant. His own past, the soldier he'd left behind years ago, still lingered somewhere on this same road. Maybe the Ozark Trail wasn't cursed at all. Maybe it was simply unfinished business. He saddled his horse, told May goodbye, and promised to return. Elias, she called as he rode off, whatever you're looking for, make peace with it. Don't build over it. Her words followed him like a prayer. 2 days later, Elias found the place, a clearing scarred by time and fire, where he'd once taken food and gold from a dying man during the war. He dismounted and knelt beside the shallow depression that the earth still carried. Whoever you were, he whispered, I'm sorry. The wind stirred and the grass bent as if something unseen moved through it. He dug until his hands bled. Beneath the soil he found fragments, a rusted button, a piece of fabric, and a dented tin locket. Inside the locket was a tiny photo of a woman and child. Elias's heart broke. You had a family, he whispered. As tears mixed with dirt, the wind seemed to sigh, almost like a voice. Now you see me. Elias bowed his head. I see you, and I won't hide you again. Elias built a wooden cross from nearby branches, carved the words Unknown Traveler, forgiven across its face, and lit a small lantern beside it. As the light flickered, he felt something inside him lift. Like a weight he'd carried for years was finally unshackled. He thought of May in the tavern, of how she'd lived with guilt that wasn't hers, and how both of them had been haunted by the same lesson, that the dead don't rest until the living forgive themselves. When he mounted his horse to leave, he found the mysterious journal again, resting in his saddlebag. This time, the handwriting was different, smoother, familiar. Peace isn't something you find, Elias. It's something you dig for, one shovel at a time. He smiled through tears and rode back toward the tavern. When Elias returned, spring had already touched the hills. The tavern looked brighter, lanterns shining, children laughing outside. May had taken in travelers and wanderers, turning the once haunted place into a haven for the lost. She gasped when she saw him. You came back. I found him, Elias said quietly. The man I buried. I made it right. May took his hands. Then maybe now we can both rest. That night, they reopened the tavern properly, giving it a new name. May painted it herself on a wooden board. The lantern rest for all who carry the past. Travelers stopped, shared stories, and lit lanterns for the souls they'd lost along the way. The ground no longer whispered. It hummed softly, peacefully, like the earth itself had forgiven. Weeks later, Thomas, now braver, found a folded letter in the ashes of the tavern hearth. It was written in a hand neither Elias nor May recognized. To those who built over my grave, thank you for uncovering more than my bones. You uncovered the truth. The trail is quiet now. Keep it that way. R.C. Elias looked out the window at the oak tree where Robert Cole now rested. A faint glow surrounded the grave, not eerie but warm, like the shimmer of a lantern in the fog. He whispered, Rest easy, Robert. We'll keep the fire burning. Years passed. The Ozark Trail changed, but travelers still spoke of the Lantern Rest Tavern, where the ale was warm and the stories warmer. Some swore that, on quiet nights, when the wind blew just right, you could still hear faint voices whispering, Not cries for help, but words of gratitude. Elias grew old there, carving new crosses for those who came burdened with their own ghosts. One morning, May found him sitting beneath the oak, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. The journal lay open beside him, the last line written in elegant handwriting. I came to this place carrying guilt. I leave it carrying peace. May wept softly, closed the journal, and placed it beneath the roots of the oak, next to the man who'd helped the dead and the living find rest. As dusk fell, the tavern's lanterns flickered on their own, glowing like stars against the dark woods. And for the first time in its long haunted history, the Ozark Trail was truly silent. Not because it had forgotten, but because it had finally been heard,